Section 11.3, we already discussed quadratic formula, and you understand that quadratic formula, what you have under the radical is important. What it means that b squared minus 4ac. If b squared minus 4ac happen to be a negative number, then under the radical you have negative, then we have to deal with the complex or I values. But if b squared minus 4ac is greater than 0, means you could take a square root of the positive number and then you always end up with two numbers. Or if b squared minus 4ac is 0, this is completely gone. So then you have minus b plus or minus 0. So it's just minus b over 2a. And in that case, you always have only one answer. See? So if b squared minus 4ac is 0, one rational. If it's positive, there are two. And you have two rational solutions or two irrational solutions that it shows you, explain here what it is, okay? See the difference? The irrational, it has a radical in it, just the name. And rational, it could be a whole number or fraction, but when you deal with the radical, then it's irrational. And if b squared minus 4ac is negative, if b squared minus 4ac is a negative, then under the radical, you have a negative number, then you have to deal with a complex number, see, I. So you always have three scenarios. That's what they call it, discriminant. It's sometimes enough to know that what type of number or solution will be without actually solving the equation, because you don't have to solve the equation. When we ask you to tell whether there is solution or not, whether one solution, two solution, or no, or is it complex or real, all you need to do is work on this b squared minus 4ac. That will tell you whether you are going to have answers or not. That's what they're discussing here, okay? So, like here, solve the equations. I mean, for the equation, not solve them, I'm sorry. For the equation, determine what type of number the solution are and how many. Which one of these? All right, so for those, the first one, again, all we need to do is determine b squared minus 4ac. In this case, happen to be 20. If b squared minus 4ac is positive, then you always have two answers. And if it's not a perfect square, see, if it's not a perfect square, means you have this, you have like formula is minus b plus or minus radical 20 over 2a, right? See, when you have radical 20, means you cannot take the whole thing out of the radical. You end up having the radical. So radical 20 is 4 times 5 or 2 radical 5. When you end up having radical, then they call it irrational solutions, because you don't have the perfect square. Perfect square means, let's say under the radical, I have something like this, 9. So what's the outcome? 3. So you don't have to deal with the radical. They call it rational. So if it's not a perfect square, then it's irrational. Like this one. I wrote it like this so you understand. See, so you could see that b is 0. If you write it like that, a is 1, b is 0, and c is 1. See, b squared minus 4ac is that, which is negative. When it's a negative, what is it when it's a negative? Is here two imaginary number. If b squared minus 4ac is a negative, you have two imaginary solutions. If B squared minus 4AC, if it's positives depend. You either have two rational or two irrational. Two irrational is when you're dealing with radical. Here we are dealing with radical, right? Because it's radical 20. So that's why when you're dealing with the radical is irrational. Again, I write it like this for you. Since you don't see any x, I just put 0x. So you see A is 1, B is 0, C is -8. So if you don't see any x, means B is 0. So B squared minus 4AC is positive number, but it's not, again, a perfect square, so it would be irrational. This one, B squared minus 4AC, 144. 144 is a perfect square because it's 12 to the power of 2. So it could always come out of the radical, see? So here, you end up having radical 144, which is 12. So it isn't a perfect square. When it's in the perfect square, then it would be two rational solutions, see? Rational solutions. This is just a quadratic formula. See, in this one, in this example, B squared minus 4 is a negative. Remember when under the radical is negative, then you have what? Then it's undefined, but you do have a complex number. So it's two imaginary numbers. I'll just show you the solution. They didn't want you to solve the solution. They just want you to tell, right? You could stop right here and say, you know what, is minus 24 when B squared minus 4AC is a negative number. When B squared minus 4AC is negative, then you have two imaginary solutions, okay? So here, B squared minus 4AC is a negative, right? So it's imaginary numbers. And if you want to solve it, that's how you solve it. See, that final answer is imaginary number. Okay, number 6. Okay, just a minute, let me find the problem for number 6 so we know what's going on. Number 6 is this. Write a quadratic equation in the variable x having the given numbers. Okay, what it is, if you have, what they want you to do is doing it backward, means you have the solutions and you want to do it backward to find the general equation. All the problem we did so far, we give you an equation and you solve and you find the answer. What if we give you the answers and we want you to look backward to find the equations? In that case, there are two answers, -8 and 6. You open two parentheses, multiply equal to 0. In the parentheses, you put opposite sign. Like if you have -8, you put +8. If you have 6, you put negative. When you multiply these two and simplify, this is the general equation. So this equation, if you use the quadratic formula, would give you these two answers. So you do it backward. But problem number 7, they give you the solution already. You open two parentheses. In the parentheses, you put the same number with the opposite sign. When you multiply and simplify, it gives you original equation. Like if I go ahead and solve this equation using the quadratic formula, I end up having these two answers. So you do it backward, means you have the answers already and you find the solution. See? One answer is 4, 1 is, because it's the fractions, what I do is I just multiply it and write it like that, right? So 1 parenthesis is 5x, -4, 1 is positive, is negative 4. When you multiply and simplify, that gives you equation. So in case of the fractions, do not write minus 4/5. Just cross multiply first. 5x is 4 times 1, and then put this as a negative. Now, look, you have these two answers. What's the opposite sign for this? What's the opposite sign for that? When you multiply, it's what? It's, you could either use this formula that anytime you take a minus b and times a plus b, you have a squared minus b squared. They call it conjugate. Both are the same thing. One is the difference, one is the sum. Or if you just multiply, look, x times x is x2. X times radical 21 is plus radical 21x. Distribute this one. X times minus radical 21 is minus radical 21x. And then minus radical 21 times positive radical 21 is just minus 21. These two cancel, so is x2 minus 21 equal to 0, okay? They call it conjugate. And you could really figure out this formula. A times a is a squared, and you have ab and minus ba cancel, so it would be minus b squared. The same thing for this one. Opposite of this is that, opposite sign is that. When you multiply, is x times x is x2. 4 radical 5 times 4 radical 5 is what? Is 4 squared. Radical 5 times radical 5 is just 5, okay? Radical 5 times radical 5 is just 5. Remember, if you take a radical and multiply by itself, radical is removed. So that's why you end up having. This time they give you two complex numbers. Means the solution was I in it. Okay, what's the opposite of this? What's the opposite of that? Again, you multiply x times x is x2 minus 15 times 15 is 15 to the power of 2. I times I is I2. And we understand that I2 always is negative 1. Remember, because I is radical minus 1, I2 is negative 1. So if you put negative 1 here, then you end up having. The last one, there are 3 answers. In that case, there are 3 parentheses. Negative 2 opposite is positive 2. 1 opposite is negative 1. 3 opposite. When you multiply the whole thing, that would be your third degree equation. See, the highest degree of x determine how many answers, how many total answers do you have. Since the highest power is 3, you have always 3 answers, or total possible answers are 3. So when you have 3 parentheses, I would combine these two first, and multiply these two first, simplify it, and then multiply by that one. All right.